Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National 911 Program State of 911 webinar. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we'll conduct a question-and-answer session, and instructions will follow at that time. If anyone should require assistance, please press star then 0 on your touch-tone telephone. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. I will now turn the call over to your host, Colby Rackful. Please go ahead.
Hello, and welcome to the 6th installment of the State of 911 webinar series being presented by the National 911 Program. My name is Colby Rackfall, and I am support for the program. This webinar series was designed to offer 911 stakeholders information about ongoing federal and state 911 and NG 911 projects and provide real experiences and best practices from early adopters about the NG 911 transition process currently underway across the country. Like I mentioned before, this is the 6th installment of our bi-monthly series. Each webinar consists of a presentation from a federal level and a state level 911 stakeholder, with each being followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. At the end of the event, if there is time left over, we'll open up the floor again to all questions. Following the event, a recording of the presentation along with the slides will be posted to the National 911 Program's website, www.911.gov. You can also go there to find information on past and future events, as well as to learn more about the National 911 Program. We will begin today's event with a presentation from the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Emergency Communications Branch Director of Policy and Planning, Ryan Orland. Mr. Orland will discuss the updated National Emergency Communications Plan and how it relates to the 911 community. Following a Q&A with Mr. Orland, Mr. David Tucker, Executive Director of the Vermont Enhanced 911 Board, will be presenting on Vermont's recent statewide Text-to-911 trial and best practices for NG 911 implementation. Now I'd like to hand it off to Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program.
Thanks, Colby. We've heard from you that you can't get here to Washington as often as you'd like to, and you would like to know what's going on at the federal level. So we have split these webinars in half, providing information on what's going on within the federal government in the 911 space during the first half, and then providing you with the experiences of your colleagues in terms of early adopters of NG 911 and other things like the interim text to 911. We encourage you to ask both of these people today your questions when they're done with their presentation. They are here to provide information as well as to answer whatever questions you may have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ryan Orland. We're really happy that Ryan is with us today. Ryan is the Director of Policy and Planning for DHS's Office of Emergency Communications, and as Colby said, he will be presenting an update for 911 on the National Emergency Communications Plan. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lori, and good afternoon for everyone on the East Coast, and good morning to everyone, rest of the country joining us on this call. Lori said, my name is Ryan Orland, Policy and Planning here at the Office of Emergency Communications. I do appreciate the opportunity presented today to speak with this community and help increase awareness of OEC's mission, programs, and activities. Series of webinars has been a great opportunity for everyone to learn more about each other's mission space, especially with the increasing number of interdependencies between your public safety community, your 911 community, even some on the alerts and warnings and emergency management entities that involve communications. So new technology is obviously driving a more connected environment for all of us, but I think we also have to acknowledge a lot of the partnerships that have been formed between our community, and they're really starting to take shape. And a good example of that is the one between DHS and DOT with Lori. How do we know that these communities are coming together more? Well, for one example, we see Lori a lot more at our meetings and conferences, and vice versa, right, Lori?
Absolutely.
I also think that the presentation from Chief Dowd on the Public Safety Broadband Network a few months ago, another good example of the cross-pollinization between your public safety communications, emergency responders, and the disciplines in the 911 community. So what we're going to do today here is fill you in on some of the things that OEC is doing, our office, try to tailor it more around the 911 community, but overall give a snapshot on how quickly the overall environment is changing. One of our main programs here is the development of a new National Emergency Communications Plan. And a lot has changed since the last one was released in 2008, and we'll walk through a lot of those changes and what it means for the next plan. So if you look here at slide, I think this is 1 or maybe it's 2, just a snapshot of what OEC does. Many of you may be familiar with the Office of Emergency Communications. We were set up following the Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Office formally stood up in early 2007, really focused on a lot of the planning, training, and coordination to ensure emergency responders and government officials have interoperable communications during incidents of all scopes and sizes. So a few of our programs include the NECP. We've been responsible working with the states to improve their governance posture for interoperability, their planning. We have state plans in all 56 states and territories now. And we also provide a lot of tools in support to grant programs here at DHS to make sure that they are reflective of the environment and some of the challenges and solutions for improving emergency communications. Here's just bucketed a few of the different programs we have here at OEC, just a snapshot, and not everything, but we did want to give everyone a flavor of the different capabilities we have, from strategic planning, national and statewide strategic planning. We do a lot of stakeholder collaboration. Hopefully some of you are familiar with terms like SAFECOM and are getting more familiar with our statewide interoperability coordinator council that stood up a few years ago. It includes a representative from each state and territory who's kind of the point person within the state for coordinating interoperability programs and activities. Same time, we've got something called the ECPC. That's our federal group that Lori is a member of, and a very active one in addition, as well as something called One DHS. That's just something that we have here at DHS to make sure we're all on the same page. So we've helped stand up a lot of these coordination bodies and governance groups over the past few years. We're also pretty visible out in the field. We are doing workshops with the states to make sure their plans are updated to reflect new changes and successes and challenges. And we have a technical assistance program, too. Recently, we've really parlayed a lot of our statewide experience and technical assistance to help states and localities start preparing for the broadband, public safety broadband network. And so we've got a few programs around that. This is just a primer of OEC. At the end of this presentation, I'll go into some more details on what we're doing in the 911 world, too. So moving right along, wanted to provide kind of the update to the National Emergency Communications Plan as the focal point for today's discussion. We would be happy to answer any questions you may have about what OEC does and certain programs, but for the next few slides, next few minutes, we'll talk about what we're doing with the National Emergency Communications Plan. I think I mentioned it at the outset that the first plan was released in 2008, so it's been 5 years. And a whole lot has changed. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But what we've been doing really since the beginning of this year in 2013 is using a similar stakeholder-driven approach in updating the NECP that was used the last time. So we've been getting feedback from all major public safety and emergency communication groups. So that includes presentations and status reports on a regular basis to SAFECOM, to APCO, to the ECPC, that federal group, as well as some more roll-up-the-sleeves working sessions. We've had about 30 of those over the past several months to get feedback on broad and specific portions and solutions and challenges. They've really helped us identify the recommendations and priorities of the plan. We've touched on public safety disciplines. We've had some good conversations with PSAP officials. Being so close to Fairfax County here, we've done some work with Steve Souter and Carol Adams, if some of you are familiar with them. At the same time, we had a breakout session just a couple weeks ago at APCO. So we have really been aggressive in trying to get people involved in helping us formulate the plan and keeping everyone in their associations and stakeholder groups updated on where we're going with the plan. We're going to continue to get input. We're putting together the draft plan, and we hope to get it out for stakeholder feedback, additional feedback later this fall after we've cleared some DHS review hurdles. So that's really a snapshot on how we've been moving out this year to develop the plan. One thing we kept hearing from everyone is have some continuity with the first plan. We set a good foundation there, and that foundation is just as important moving forward. So the next couple slides will review some of the ground we've covered throughout all these stakeholder working groups, and then we'll get into some specifics from the plan. Okay, I'll run through this pretty quickly. There's a lot here on the screen, the influencers of the NECP, and it's really just to try to bucket all the different things we've looked at in the different categories, from changes and progression of doctrine and guidance and plans out there. How's NIMS going in terms of implementation, new grant program, the NTIA SLIG-P, progression of the statewide SCIPs. We also looked at policy and legislative changes, and there have been a whole bunch of those in the past 5 years, starting with the Middle Class Tax and Jobs Creation Act that created the National Broadband Public Safety Network. Some executive orders have done some reorganizing of federal roles and responsibilities and programs for emergency communications, and we've also looked at things like PPD-8, the new presidential directive, over the last couple of years. At the same time, OEC's had a lot of programs, and we've learned a lot from being out in the field, so we've been putting that into our NECP blender, for lack of a better word. And technology developments, a whole lot of technology changes since the last plan, lessons learned, another thing that we've covered, weather events, terrorist attack in Boston, and stakeholders, new stakeholders, same stakeholders with new ideas. So we've really covered a broad landscape from technology to lessons learned, policies, and stakeholders to try to update this plan appropriately so that it's driving improvements in current capabilities and making sure everyone's prepared and planning for what's coming down the pike in new technologies to facilitate emergency communications. So that slide isn't comprehensive of everything. We probably could fill it up with more, but just to give everyone a snapshot of the different lanes we've looked at and some of the key things that we've considered. So what have we learned? Well, as I mentioned before, we started with the foundation from the original plan, which was focused on communications for public safety emergency responders, your fire, EMS, law enforcement, that kind of stuff. And as we showed on the previous slide, we've looked at the various changes in the environment since the first plan. There's a lot out there to digest, a lot to understand, but we really see all this building towards three developments and drivers of this plan, and we've shown them right here, matched up against the old plan. So I'll go through them real quickly, and then we'll go into what this means for the NECP. Whole of community. Hopefully people on the call are becoming more familiar with this concept. It really is the cornerstone of the Department of Homeland Security's preparedness policy, and it's focused around leveraging the resources and capabilities from across the community to plan, respond, and recover from disasters and incidents. Not just a federal government-centric approach. It's really trying to leverage the private sector, public, state, local, and all the capabilities they bring to bear to help respond and recover. It's really forming a deep bench of people involved in response operations. So that's a big change, a big new development over the last few years. At the same time, IP-based technologies, the use of new technologies has dramatically changed for the emergency responder. Right now, primarily used for mission support, administrative functions, but as we all know, with the deployment of the broadband network, they will increasingly support mission-critical emergency response, voice, video, and data. That's down the road, though, but it's coming, and that's a key development. But at the same time, we also found that the same type of modernization with your classic responder communication is going on elsewhere within the emergency communications environment. Other communication functions and networks involved during emergencies are also being upgraded. So what are we talking about when we say that? We're talking about alerts and warnings. IPAWS, the national program, has just been really started to roll out on a more nationwide level. Citizens, public, using social media a lot more during emergencies. Also, smartphones were a lot more available these days to send texts and pictures during emergency situations. And as this community knows, the 911 system is being upgraded, text to 911, eventually next generation 911 capability. So we're seeing this modernization not just within the responder communications lane, but also in other avenues that are involved in communications during emergency. So the NECP, we're going to start addressing all these changes in one plan. the plan is still going to be focused on your government-to-government communications during incident response, your responder comms, even dispatch to responders. That's really the core mission of OEC and the charge that Congress has sent to develop the NECP. But we're also broadening the scope with this plan to cover other key emergency communication functions and stakeholders, such as communications from government agencies to the public, as well as public communications during emergency, and as well as communications from the public to PSAPs. Public is also playing a big role in terms of reporting information to the government. DHS has a See Something, Say Something campaign, and that was used a lot during the response to Boston, for example. So as we illustrate here, this ecosystem is becoming more robust, more interconnected as technologies and partnerships mature. So what does that mean for the emergency responder, your communications for responders, your communications from dispatch to responder? Well, what we think here is that all the planning, governance, and procedures and training that's been going on over the last several years, they need to be updated to account for this evolving ecosystem, this environment in which people are becoming more interconnected and interdependent. So the NECP will be addressing that previous concept of pieces and functions for communications coming together more. This slide here focuses more on the impact on the emergency responder, the main constituents of the plan, the public safety communications used by responders. And what we've done here was taken that last concept to focus on that top line and what it means. And what we're seeing here is because of technology, information and communications is being transmitted faster, quantity is bigger, the occurrence is faster, the accuracy is better. We've also got more partners involved in communication. I talked about the whole of community before. We've got more partners and individuals and entities involved in responses information. So that means more sources of information. So add them together and you've got more people in feeding responder comms information and better technology to make it get there faster, easier, and more robust. So two big influences on responder communications. Major benefits: better situational awareness, coordination during response, hopefully improved decision-making. At the same time, there are challenges too. The data has to be managed correctly, needs to be filtered so it can be used most efficiently. And also a relatively new aspect for your responder communications is it's going to have to be secure too. It's more connected to other aspects, and IP-based communications and things like that opens up some security challenges. So really taking that last concept and drilling down more into what it means to the emergency responder. NECP that we're working on is going to tee this up, both the pros and the cons, and we're developing priorities and recommendations around preparing the community for this, bringing them together to plan more, train more with new partners and on new technologies. So here is a quick overview of the main goals of the plan, and you'll see if you're familiar with the first plan, they do tie back to that original one that focused on governance and planning and leadership, training and exercises, research and development, new technology. But what we're saying with this plan is really stressing the need to update those, stressing the need to update what's been put into place over the past couple of years to keep pace with that environment that we just walked through, and the new technologies, the new partners, new stakeholders. More elements of the broader emergency communications community need to be accounted for in your planning, governance, training, exercises, and things like that. And we specifically call out the need to coordinate more with PSAPs, emergency management agencies, and even with the state levels, chief information officers, security officers, and things like that. So the goals are designed to be actionable, achievable, and measurable for this plan. We don't want to start from scratch, though. We acknowledge that there are a lot of financial restraints out there, budget cuts and things like that, and we just need to update what we put in place before and find creative ways to continue to progress down this road. So that's a quick overview of the background, what's really setting up for this plan. Here are some of the goals on what we are building the plan around, and we have some recommendations to implement these specific goals. The next slide just gives you a quick overview on the phases of development. We really kicked this off at the beginning of the year, did a lot of outreach, federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, We identified the issues, talked with them about challenges and solutions for that. And right now we're wrapping up phase 2, putting together a draft and hopefully get it out the first quarter of FY14, the last couple months of the year, for review and feedback from stakeholders. So that's really a snapshot of the NECP. What I wanted to highlight with this slide, I talked a little bit about the beginning of OEC's programs and activities, and we're really trying to get ahead of a lot of these changes that I just walked through that are informing the NECP. So we do have a few programs that are active in the planning and coordination area that might be interest of people on this call. We just did a workshop in Iowa that brought together their interoperability board with the Enhanced 911 Council, and they did a planning workshop and developed a statewide plan that accounted for both of those entities' interests and priorities. SAFECOM recently stood up an NG 911 work group, disseminate more information, best practices, really just facilitate more information sharing around developments related to 911 technologies. At the same time, I said at the beginning, we have a technical assistance program, puts us out in the field a little bit more. And really last year, we started building out our offerings that support NG 911, COOP planning, and PSCC operations. So just a couple bullets here giving you an overview of what we're doing in this area. The latest numbers, we've done 9 NG 911 workshops, NG 911 workshops around the country, some COOP planning workshops, and 15 dispatch operation workshops across 18 states. And we're working with the states who have requested more information on this. If you have any information on our technical assistance catalog, I've provided a link down there below. If you look under Resources and TA Request tab on the home page. So that's really a snapshot of the office, where we're going with the national plan that we hope to get out in the next few months, and a couple specific examples of how we're trying to adapt to this new environment and leading with governance support, planning support, as well as some technical assistance. So that concludes my presentation. I know we have some time left for questions and answers, and I'll kick it back to Lori.
If you have any questions for Mr. Orland, please press the star key and dial 1.
As a reminder, those of you on the phone line, please press star 1 to ask a question.
Well, thanks. I'll be on the call for the next half an hour if people think of some questions, if they're kind of just digesting a lot of the stuff that I've walked through, a lot of PowerPoint. We love to use PowerPoint here in the federal government, so if there are no questions now, we can take them later or intermittently through the rest of the webinar. But I'll still be here and look forward to hearing from some of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Orland. I'd like to now hand it back to Lori to introduce David Tucker, the Executive Director of the Vermont Enhanced 911 Board.
Thanks, Colby. The 911 system in the state of Vermont has long been held as one of the real front runners in terms of being an early adopter of NG 911 technology. So we're really lucky today to have David Tucker with us, who's the Executive Director for the Vermont Enhanced 911 Board, and he's going to share with us Vermont's experiences with regard to NG 911 as well as text to 911. And I would encourage you again, if you have questions about what might have worked, what lessons they might have learned from things that didn't work so well, please save them up and ask them when Mr. Tucker is done with his presentation. So, David, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Lori, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you briefly this afternoon about what we have for a system and what we've been doing with it. Go to the next slide, please. The NG system that we have here in Vermont, we acquired a fully hosted call distribution system from Intrado, and Intrado partnered with our incumbent local exchange carrier, which is Fairpoint Communications, and Fairpoint provides a multi-protocol layer switching network essentially the ESI that we utilize. We currently have our 8 PSAPs connected with each other. We have not yet taken the step of connecting the ESI to some of the responders. We're going to start looking at that probably sometime next year, but we're not sure exactly where we're going to go in that direction. But at this point in time, with the 8 small PSAPs we have in the state and the system we have in place, we're able to have the PSAPs back each other up. And they do that because we have the system structured to deliver calls in multiple tiers. The first tier of calls, a call from a specific town in Vermont is routed to a PSAP that is assigned to cover that town in what we call catchment areas. Those PSAPs will generally be able to handle most of the calls that are directed to them in the first instance. In a case where the available call takers are tied up at the original PSAP, the calls roll to a statewide queue, and what happens is the calls are directed to the call taker that is online and has been idle the longest. So when I use the word queue, I don't mean to suggest that these calls go into a holding pattern. It's just that they're directed to what we refer to as a statewide queue. So somebody, calling 911 in Vermont generally gets their calls answered in 10 seconds or less. If it has to roll to a backup PSAP, it can take a little bit longer, but that's usually 15 to 20 seconds at the most. And the system, as it's designed, distributes and manages those calls dynamically. And what that means is that a single point of failure doesn't cripple the system. When we went through Tropical Storm Irene here in Vermont 2 years ago, I think it was just 2 years ago last week, the 911 system was fully capable and stayed up, and we took all of the calls that were presented that day, notwithstanding the fact that one of the PSAPs actually had to shut down for about 12 hours because the flood waters were coming up a little bit in Rutland, and they needed to get out of the building for a while, and they logged off the system, and the system just rerouted those calls to the backup PSAPs or to the other 7 PSAPs, which are backing each other up. So, during that high volume event here in Vermont, we are not aware of a single 911 call that was not answered. There were some other challenges because there weren't enough emergency responders to respond to all of the calls that we were getting or do so as quickly as everybody wanted to, but the 911 system managed all the calls appropriately. Go to the next slide. So, there's some clear benefits to the approach that we took. It's not the only way to do it, but, with a hosted system, we have a single point of contact. So if there's an issue with the system, if there's a question about upgrading it, if there's something that we don't think is working right or something we want to do differently, well, we have one place to go, and that entity is responsible for the calls from from when somebody calls 911 all the way through to how they're delivered, and the system also includes pretty good mapping program that's going through an upgrade process and things like that. So having a single point of contact instead of trying to juggle multiple vendors and getting into the stereotypical finger pointing between vendors has made things a lot easier for us. It simplifies the vendor management because we only have one place to go, or as I like to say, one neck to squeeze when there's a challenge. So we're very pleased with that. And I think one of the other things that it does is it enables cost control because we have a 5-year contract for the system. We know what it's going to cost us. We know what it cost us last year. We know what it's going to cost us in the coming years, with a possible exception as we begin to roll out more features that an IP-based system enables. There could be some increased costs down the road. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about a couple of things we've done, and this first one is location-based wireline routing. We think, or we understand, that we're the first statewide implementation of wireline routing, and what wireline routing does is it uses validated address points to route calls to the PSAP that is to answer them. You know, in these days when more and more 911 calls are being taken on from wireless devices, where we get, you know, increasingly better XY coordinates for location of a wireless call, we felt it was important to shift the wireline calls so that we have XY coordinates for the address points. And, you know, we're doing that for a couple of reasons. One, it makes it easier to keep the GIS data up to date and accurate, and it also positions us to better use the mapping services that are provided as part of the system that we acquired. You know, it won't be that much more time, perhaps, before everything will be, you know, XY coordinates, and there's more and more reliance on mapping the 911 program. We're currently working on a separate project to push information out to emergency responders through a mobile application that we're in the process of having developed by a different vendor, and we just see the, you know, the XY routing as really, you know, what the future is going to hold. And so we went ahead and moved to that this year. I don't know, a couple, 3 months ago, I guess we got it implemented, and you know, but for the occasional piece of data that's missing or whatever, we got a pretty good data set, and it's made the discrepancy tracking and everything else work a lot better. Next slide. The biggest thing that we've been able to accomplish by having an IP-based system is we've really been able to move aggressively into implementing text to 911. We did our original trial in April of 2012 with Verizon. Verizon did a great job. They stepped up to the plate, said they wanted to do this. We partnered with them. We set it up as a 6-month trial, but during those 6 months, we had two or three significant interventions that resulted from receiving a text on the Verizon system. So at the end of the trial, and based on the success that we'd had, Verizon left the system in place, and it's continuing to deliver texts today. In December of last year, we launched a second trial with Sprint. That trial ran for 5 months, although, you know, Sprint has a smaller footprint in Vermont, and we didn't get any emergencies reported on it, but they were able to demonstrate that they could deliver texts through an integrated IP-based system like the one that we have. And although they took the system down in order to do network changes, some of it was part of their retirement of the Nextel system, and it also had to do with needing to put up bounce-back messages that they had agreed to provide. But that's, you know, only a we think it's only temporary. We're fully expecting to get that system back up by the end of this year. The most recent change is we launched a third trial on August 23rd with AT&T. Why don't you go to the next slide? Okay. And also in the process of getting ready to do this, to do the AT&T trial, we also obtained commitments from Sprint and T-Mobile to launch before May of 2014. The best thing that's happened, besides the fact that AT&T subscribers now have this service, is it really means that 90% of the state has text to 911 service available. And we say it's 90%. We use the percentage of wireless voice calls that are delivered on each wireless carrier's network. to come up with those numbers. And Verizon was about 45% of the wireless voice calls, and so was AT&T. So using that as a proxy for penetration, we feel that we have 90% of the state covered now. And that's important not only because it provides service, but we were kind of in a conundrum about how to do public education. When we had one carrier and then a second smaller carrier in place, it was difficult explaining to people, how they could access text to 911. I'll tell you, I actually sat in a meeting with some representatives of some battered women's groups talking about what we were doing with text to 911, and I told them that it was currently, at that point, it was available on Sprint and Verizon, but it wasn't ubiquitous yet. And I no sooner said that, somebody handed me her AT&T phone and asked me to show her how it worked, and I couldn't do that. So, public education for text to 911 is kind of a chicken and egg discussion. It's like, if you really put a push for public education before you've got, a broad enough base, then you risk confusing the very people that you want to use the service, who may not remember that it's only one or two carriers or a slice of the market in the state. And, the last thing you need is to have somebody be confused about having the service available and try to use it in an emergency and not be able to do it. So getting AT&T on board along with Verizon and with the expected additions of T-Mobile and Sprint by the end of the year, we've been able to start really working on public education for text to 911. We hired under contract a media consultant who is developing television spots that we were going to put on the air, and we're going to start that September 23rd, right at the beginning of the new television season. And he is also working with representatives of the deaf and hard of hearing community. We're going to do some sort of a YouTube video for the deaf and hard of hearing using American Sign Language interpreters to communicate the availability of the services, and post that to YouTube, and then we'll be able to post that link to our website. The deaf and hard of hearing community can provide that link out within their community, and we can put it on our Facebook page, which is not formally launched yet, but it's under development, and we're hoping that by having having available some of the new social media tools and starting to use them, that we'll be able to reach a broader audience and get the word out better than we've been able to do during the original trial. So, we're excited about that. We'll have some stuff to share with folks in October if people are interested, and I'll probably get hold of Lori or somebody and let her know when we have some stuff to share. And you're more than welcome to take a look at what we're trying to do and see if you can do something similar, or give us some suggestions on some other things that we can do, because now that the service is more or less ubiquitous in the state, it's really time to promote it. Before I get too far off track here, and it's not on a slide, I just wanted to throw out there, just for folks that may still have concerns about, the impact of text to 911. We found that none of the urban myths that we've all heard about text to 911 have come true, and I think that's being proven over and over again in other states and jurisdictions that are doing these trials. We are not being bombarded by text as opposed to voice messages. We are not having problems with kids sending us text or people using text slang. I won't say that hasn't happened, but it's happened so infrequently as to be, a non-event. I mean, we just have not seen the bad things that we were warned about coming to fruition. Between April of 2012 and a couple of months ago, is the last time I looked at the total numbers. But we'd only received 185 texts in the state, but most of those texts were tests. We've had a dozen, somewhere between 12 and 15 emergency texts, or a report of a crime in progress, or a crime that had been committed that wasn't necessarily an emergency, but was still something that we needed to know about. And out of those 12 to 15 legitimate texts, you know, we have managed to intervene in a couple of suicide attempts. We were able to intervene in a situation where a woman was being abused by her husband at home, and she literally texted us from a closet, and we got the police out there and arrested her husband. And as I said, we've had a couple of non-emergency type crimes being reported. Somebody texted us one day about somebody who was dealing drugs out in front of their building, and we got a text from somebody that had some property stolen. We were able to, you know, we were able to reach back out and say, you know, can you call us on the phone? It'd be a lot easier, and we handled the interaction that way. But the fact that we were contacted by text suggests that there are people that will take advantage of this, once they have it available to them. So, as we're preparing the marketing stuff, we're going to use the call if you can, text if you can't slogan, and we're trying to build that into the campaign, and I'm expecting and hoping for some good results as a result of this media campaign that we're going to launch. We're probably going to spend $40,000 in total by the time we get to the end of this. But I think it has the opportunity to really have an impact and get people to be aware of what we're doing and aware of the service being more available in the state. So with that, I'll stop and ask if there's any questions.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, to ask a question, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone telephone. We do have a question from Eddie Reilly. Your line is open. Eddie, if your line is on mute, can you please unmute it? He may have pressed the star 1 key in error. Our next question comes from Pete Kirby. Your line is open.
I wanted to ask, how long was your initial trial period before you decided that the trial was sufficient and you moved ahead anyway?
Well, the original trial with Verizon was scheduled for 6 months, and about 4.5 months into it was when we had we had the first suicide intervention, and we'd also received a text from the woman who was being abused. So kind of coincidentally around that time, some folks from Verizon wanted to come up to Vermont and see what we were doing in the PSAP with text to 911, and somebody, and I forget her name and exactly where she was on the org chart at Verizon Wireless, but she was somebody in the senior leadership position there, came up and spent some time at the Williston PSAP and talked to folks, and I think it was largely on the basis of the response that she got from the call takers about text to 911, because she was asking people, so what do you like about this, and what's important to you about this? And to a person, they said, hey, listen, we know that we've saved probably 2 lives with this, and whatever you do, don't take this away from us. And I think it was largely on that validation that Verizon decided to leave the system in place, and it's still operational.
Our next question comes from Donna Penha. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning. We're out here in California, and David, how you doing?
Not bad. How are you?
Okay, pretty good. Hey, just a couple of questions regarding your PSAPs. You said you had 8 PSAPs in Vermont connected?
Yes.
And in general, is there one PSAP more than another? Like, what's your highest call volume per hour? What's your stress test for your PSAPs there?
You know, I guess I don't know that number off the top of my head. I mean, we're a small state, and the 8 PSAPs are very small. You know, we took just over 200,000 911 voice calls last year, so it's a small implementation of a major system.
Okay, then carrying on from that, you know, and I understand that, you know, 200,000 calls, it's actually a lot, and some of the days can be slow, and some of the days you could have 10 or 15 calls per hour. My question regarding the system is the bandwidth to each PSAP. Did Fairpoint determine that for you, or did Entrado determine that for you? And can you estimate what you're using? Are you using like 1 T1 or 2 T1s? Who worked on that?
Well, Entrado provided that as part of the package, and while I'm sure we have that documented someplace, I don't have that committed to my memory. I'd be happy to look into that if you want to share your contact information with Lori or send it to me directly. I'll be happy to try to get you a direct answer to that, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, yeah, it's just a matter of, you know, were you just accommodating the basic landline calls, or were you also accommodating the wireless calls too? And just wondering what they used or how that calculation came up, because we do understand that the high cost component for these IP systems is the network connectivity. Especially if you're going like from 3 trunks to 16 or 23 and a T1, it's a lot different. So I'd be happy to send my questions regarding that. And can I ask another question, or is somebody waiting?
I think you have the floor.
Okay. I'm sorry, was there somebody?
Oh, I said go ahead, ask your question.
Okay, is that Lori? Hi. Okay, the other question was pretty much regarding the service providers. Is your system of the 8 PSAP still interconnecting with the selective routers, or are you using an Entrado router?
I believe that we're using an Entrado router.
And okay, so this is my specific question then. The service providers, end office points and you know, mobile switching centers and such like that, is the state of Vermont paying for the interconnectivity of the service providers into the router, or is that a cost that the service providers take on?
There's a cost associated with that, then I assume that we're paying for it, but that's all bundled into our contract with Entrado. I couldn't tell you how much that costs or exactly how many service providers we're doing that with. You know, your earlier question about are we using this network to deliver both landline and mobile, and the answer is both.
Okay.
But I don't know the specifics about the contractual arrangements that Entrado made with companies that are effectively their subcontractors. That's, you know, I don't think I can find out even if I asked. I think they consider that proprietary. We know what we pay them, and that's what it costs us. But we don't.
Yeah, because one of the parts of the next-gen transition document is how you transition the service providers into a new, you know, next-gen solution. And taking off of that, we've come up with some complexities of, you know, both potentially migrating wireless providers from legacy over to next-gen, and then also the landline providers over to next-gen. And our situation here is the fact of subsidies or no subsidies and who should pay for it. And I was just curious to see if that was something that you were continuing to pay for, or if that was bundled, and it kind of sounds like it's bundled then.
I believe it's bundled.
Okay. And would you be willing to share your cost of 5 years with the people on this call, or is that confidential?
I don't think that the cost is confidential. We're spending $1.2 million a year to have the services delivered. There were some upfront implementation costs that we paid, but the annual cost is right around $1.2 million, and that represents the contract that we have with Entrado.
Well, I appreciate you being on the web, and I appreciate your feedback on these questions. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Eddie Reilly. Your line is open.
Good afternoon, Dave. My question is whether you're getting your text messages directly into your telephony interface, or whether or not you're using a third-party provider.
The text messages are being routed to Entrado, and Entrado is delivering the text to the workstations at the call taker's desk. We are currently only taking text in one of the 8 PSAPs. We're working with Entrado on enabling a second one for backup now that we're getting closer to ubiquitous coverage, but they are, and I forget the exact phrase, but I think it's an IP-based native text solution. I think that was one of the 3 that were approved or set out in the standard that was released a few months ago. So it's delivered. Yeah, and basically what happens is it comes in and it tones the different sounds. It's a very unique sound, so that the call takers know it's a text and not something else. There's all kinds of sounds that go off in these PSAPs, and so the texts are delivered to 6 positions. Whoever answers it first takes the text, and then becomes unavailable to take a voice call while they're dealing with a text. But it really, it pops up on the call taker screen. It really doesn't look that much different from TTY. But it's not the text to TTY solution. It's just, once we got this installed and went to train on it, the call taker was like, well, yeah, this is like TTY. This isn't any big change for us. So, but that's how it's delivered, and all of the carriers are doing that, and we're insisting on that going forward. We don't want a second or third computer screen on the call taker's desk just to do text.
Right, that's exactly the idea. So you're doing it through the direct-in pathway rather than the third-party or the TTY interface. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Barbara Doran. Your line is open.
Hi, I'm from Las Vegas Metro Police, and my question, actually I have 2 questions. Do the texts come through the Internet where your call takers have to have Internet access? And the second question is, do you store your text received on property where if you got a subpoena or you need to do a research, you have access to do it versus contacting Entrado and have them deliver the text to you?
The texts are not delivered over the Internet. It's an IP delivery, but it doesn't come over that's not the solution. It's not the Internet-based or third-party solution. It's the texts are delivered by the carriers to Entrado, and then they route it through the IP net or through the ESI. In this case, they only send it to the one PSAP, but over time, if this grows, we'll have at least 2, and we could have a 3rd or 4th down the road. But right now, it's just delivered directly through the same system that the voice calls come in on. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
In regards to the storage of the text and accessing them for researches, monitoring, training, subpoenas, court appearances, do you keep the text on site, or do you have to go through Entrado to access the text?
The texts create something similar to the voice call detail records. So, we can just run reports on the system. It's stored in the Entrado system, just the same as the voice calls stored. But we can go out and query and get a. I've actually asked for and started to get a weekly report of all the texts that come in, and so I can literally sit here and look at all the relevant information, the time it came in, you know, the whole conversation. I can review that, see what's going on.
Okay, so you access the whole conversation at the individual PSAPs versus having to contact Intrado to get the text itself.
Well, the individual PSAPs could get it. They don't, but this office, as the administrator for the statewide system, we have access into the system to call up the record of the text, similar to how we do it if we were looking for a particular voice call.
Okay, so it just sounds like your state might be set up differently, because we do a lot of monitoring, live monitoring. We do a lot of monitoring after the fact. We get a lot of subpoenas, court appearances, and we need to have, you know, ready access versus contacting somebody off-site to get the information. So you're saying in Vermont they contact the statewide coordinator and then you supply them the records and the recordings?
We haven't had a text chat subpoenaed yet, but if somebody is looking for a voice call, they send a subpoena to this office, and we respond to the subpoenas on behalf of the 8 PSAPs, and we do that from this. You know, my office is in Montpelier. We're not directly connected to. We're not part of any PSAP, or they're not part of my operation. They're separate entities, but subpoenas are managed by somebody in this office. We have somewhat of an advantage over what I've seen in other states, because under statute, the 911 calls are still treated as confidential, so we only get subpoenaed when there's a legal case, either a criminal or civil case, but we don't have to respond to the media the way some of you folks seem to have to. We don't have our 911 calls turning up on the evening news.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm currently showing no further questions on the phone lines.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Tucker, and thanks again to Mr. Orland. And thank you all for attending today's presentation. We look forward to your participation in future State of 911 webinars. The next installment will be Thursday, November 21st at noon Eastern, with presentations from John Merklinger from the City of Rochester, County of Monroe Emergency Communications Department, and the Federal Communications Commission. Registration for this event will open up in about a month from now. Again, for more information on the National 911 Program or to view a recording of this or past events, please visit our website at www.911.gov. Thanks again.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That does conclude today's conference. You may all disconnect and have a wonderful day.